This morning we're going to be in 1 Thessalonians. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, 1 Thessalonians. My goodness, my little stand isn't quite big enough for all of this. The title of my sermon this morning is The Homecoming Soldier. The Homecoming Soldier. I read a story this week about a church that during Lent, they decided all of them to get together, and what they would do is each individual person would, during Lent, write letters and cards of encouragement to the other people that were in their Sunday school classes and that were in their church. And the pastor announced this, and all the people were excited about it. They thought they'd do it. Well, as they had the service, at the end of the service, a kind of burly macho man comes up to the pastor and says, "Now, Pastor, I appreciate what you're trying to do. I like the idea." He said, "But I'll be honest, it's a little too fuzzy for me. It's a little too feely, and I'm not that kind of person." He says, "So I won't be participating, but I do understand what you're trying to do, and I am sorry." Well, the pastor was a little downhearted, but he was still okay with it, understanding the source. By Wednesday, the man came up to the pastor at service, and he said, "Pastor, I want to apologize for what I said Sunday after service." He said, "As a matter of fact, I not only am going to do it, I've already mailed 10 letters out to people in the church." And the pastor's kind of confused. He's like, "What happened?" He said, "Well, to be honest," he said, "I received one of those letters. And it was exactly what I needed at the time. And nobody else knew." He said, "It touched me so deeply," he said, "I put it in my pocket, and I'm going to keep it there. And I'm going to read it over and over again whenever I do need a spot of encouragement." He said, "When I thought about it," he said, "how selfish of me to receive such a wonderful blessing from the Lord, and then not to give it out." He said, "So I wrote 10 other people." Have you ever had those kind of people in your life? The people that impacted you so much, it literally changed who you were. You could never, the rest of your life, be the same because they had that kind of impact. I've had people down through the years that have done that for me. We've talked in our Wednesday night Bible studies about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, Paul's prayer for the church at the Ephesian church. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, he gives another prayer to the church at Thessalonica. And this is what the prayer says. "May the Lord greatly increase your love for each other and for all people, just as we love you. Then your hearts will be strong," or some translations say, "because of this, your hearts will be strong, blameless, and holy in the presence of God, who is our Father, when the Lord Jesus appears with all the saints." His prayer for the Thessalonican church was that their love for each other and everybody would grow. And it was only through that their love in Christ would grow, is how he put it. And that's a little head scratching. Then your hearts will be strong, blameless, and holy in the presence of God. Our love for God does things that change us. God's love so fills us that it starts washing over and spilling off on everybody else. As it happens, like we mentioned a few weeks ago, when we splash our love on others, we're splashing it on Christ. Because whatever we have done for others, we've done to him, right? I think that was about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago in the sermon. Today's Old-Fashioned Sunday, where we turn back the clock a few years. We remember the good old times. We remember those saints that have gone on before. It's kind of fitting that tomorrow is All Saints' Day. I mean, we all think of Halloween in our American culture now, but for centuries it's been All Saints' Day. And there's been odd ways of worshiping that All Saints. But at least in the Methodist movement, we have taken that day, November 1st, to remember those that have gone on before, that left a good lasting memory, a legacy that needs to be followed by us. I know I've told a couple of these stories in the past, but I did look, and it's been 4 years since I told the whole thing, and so I'm going to do it again if you'll give me permission. It was in 1854 that Edward Kimball was a Sunday school teacher. He was praying for his class that was just a bunch of hyperactive boys. And one day he got the touch from the Lord that he needed to go by and visit one of them at his shoe shop where he worked. And he went over to that shoe shop, just layman, just Sunday school teacher, nothing special, and he just went to pray and talk with that boy. And he went and laid his hand on that boy and talked with him about the Lord, and that little boy, at 17 years old, found the Lord. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago, that boy's name was D.L. Moody. D.L. Moody, when he was writing about his conversion, he says, when I was in Boston, I used to attend a Sunday school class. And one day I recollect my teacher came around behind the counter of the shop that I was working in, and he put his hand on my shoulder and talked to me about Christ and my soul. I had not felt that I had a soul even up until then. I said to myself, this is a very strange thing. Here's a man who never saw me till lately, and he's weeping over my sins, and I have never shed a tear about them. But I understand it now, and know what it is to have a passion for men's souls and to weep over their sins. I don't remember what he said, but I can still feel the power of that man's hand on my shoulder tonight. Moody went on to become one of the greatest evangelists in the world. He shared the gospel, think about this, with 100 million people worldwide. There's no telling how many salvations took place because of his evangelistic work and because of him founding the Moody Bible Institute and Moody Church in Chicago. His Sunday school teacher didn't do anything flashy or bold. He simply cared and he prayed for his students. Our work may not make headlines, but it could be earth-shattering. John Wilbur Chapman was raised in a godly home. He always had the feeling that he was supposed to be a preacher, and he would gather his friends around and he would tell them what he thought they needed to hear. His mom was a Methodist, his dad was a Presbyterian. What a mix. That had to have been some wild conversations at home. But as he grew older, he went to college, and after he left college, he felt like God still wanted him to be a preacher. And he started to become an evangelist. But he was greatly troubled. And one day, D.L. Moody was going to be speaking in the town where he was at. And so he went and listened to D.L. Moody 4 times in one day. Can you imagine having a service? I mean, we think, 2 services a day is rough. Can you imagine 4 in one day? And Chapman showed up at every single one of those services. And at the end, and this is his own telling of it, he said at the end, he went up to Moody because he was troubled. He said he spoke to Moody and told him that he was doubtful of his salvation. This man who's an evangelist, who served the Lord most of his life. Moody assured Chapman, and he told him, and he took him to John chapter 4, verse 24, which said, "He that heareth my word and believeth on him that sent me hath everlasting life." Chapman said and wrote, "From that time on, I never doubted my salvation." Moody would take Chapman under his wing and be the most influential person that Chapman ever had in his life. And he would go on to mentor him, and Chapman as well would become one of the most prominent clergymen in our United States. More than 60 million people attended his evangelistic campaigns around the world. 60 million people. What would have happened if D.L. Moody would have been too busy? I mean, when you're preaching 4 services a day, you got to be busy, right? Why could he not say, "Hey, I'm going to the next town, buddy. I'm sorry. It was nice, and I'll pray for you, but good luck." But that's not what he did. He took the man under his wing, and because of that, 60 million people heard the gospel. What would have happened if Moody would have not mentored him? You said, hey, buddy, don't worry about your salvation. You're okay. Don't worry. God's got you taken care of. Good luck. We'd have never had the evangelist Wilbur Chapman. Well, Wilbur Chapman, the evangelist, hired a former baseball player. Billy Sunday was a professional baseball player that got saved, changed his life completely, and he started ministering to the poor. He gave up baseball. He had, back at 1900, he had a $3,000 a month salary, which was astronomical. And he gave it all up to feed the poor, to pray for the sick, and to minister to those that were in need. He had such a name, such a baseball name, that everybody knew him. And so Wilbur Chapman said, man, if I could get him to show up to my services, people would come just to meet him. So he hired Billy Sunday as a front man for his evangelistic crusades. So get this, Billy Sunday, who was getting $3,000 a month to play baseball, an astronomical amount, would come before the services and he'd help set up the tent. He would go out in the street corners of Chicago or wherever it might be, and he would say, hey, I'm Billy Sunday. We're having an evangelistic crusade. Chapman's going to be here. It's going to be great. You should come. Well, because everybody knew Billy Sunday's name, they all came to hear his testimony. They all came to meet him, shake his hand. But all the while that was taking place, Wilbur Chapman did for Billy Sunday what D.L. Moody had done for him. And he took him under his wing and he wrapped his arm around his shoulder. And Billy Sunday became an evangelist. In 1917, he died in 1935, but in 1917, by his own records, they had figured that he had 68,000 conversions to Christ. And he had another 15 years to go. 68,000 people came to faith because Wilbur Chapman saw something in Billy Sunday and said, you know what, God can use you. What would have happened if Wilbur Chapman would have hired him and said, all right, thanks, buddy, I appreciate it. Good luck. Go back to the poor. But he didn't. Well, there was a gambler in St. Louis, not Missouri, Michigan. He was a gambler, he was a card sharp. And he was a harsh man, to put it lightly. He was being prayed for, unbeknownst to him, that something would happen where he'd have to stop dealing cards. And one day when he was working on his farm equipment, his arm got stuck in the farm equipment and ripped it off. And it's pretty bad when your writing hand has been taken off. It's pretty hard to deal cards that way. So he had to stop dealing cards. But he was still a harsh man. He had heard of Billy Sunday, and he'd heard of Billy Sunday's evangelistic crusades. And he told his wife, the only preacher I'll ever listen to is Billy Sunday. And if he comes to my town, I'll go. The dummy. Because you'll never guess where Billy Sunday went and preached. In his hometown. So to keep his promise, he went and got saved. He became a pastor of a little country church on the middle of nowhere called Green Sunday School in Stanwood, Michigan. It's still there to this day. In fact, my first cousin, is now the pastor of there. Pretty wild. He had a boy and a girl. His daughter's name was Ruth. His son's name was Phil. His son Phil would go on to actually attend Mount Carmel, where several of us are from, before going on to be in Vietnam as a machine gunner on the boats that would move in and out of the rivers. Terrible job that he never talked about afterwards. When he was a senior in high school, he would go around and he would pray for those underclassmen as he was leaving. And one day there was a man there praying to receive entire sanctification, the filling of the Holy Spirit. And this little freshman, he came, and Phil, big guy, came and he wrapped his arms around him and he prayed for him. And the man received entire sanctification. The man's name was Quincy. He would go on and be drafted into Vietnam. He would go on to receive a doctorate in nuclear physics. He would go work at the Oak Ridge Nuclear Laboratories and be a professor at Auburn University. But at some point in his life, he felt a call that he needed to go back to the high school where he attended and teach. The daughter of William Bongard, the man that lost his arm, was named Ruth. And you've met Ruth, some of you, because she was my grandmother. She went to Kentucky Mountain Bible Institute where she met Bob Cottle, who had just received a call to preach, praying on the side of what is now Apollo's house at Mount Carmel. It took a lot of persuasion by her own admission and his, but she finally married the Joker. And they served the Lord all their life in little country churches, with the exception of one in Hammond, Indiana. Made a lot of impact in a lot of people's lives. Saw salvation, saw sanctification, saw people that were drug addicted and alcohol addicted completely changed. From their ministry came pastors and missionaries, workers inside the church, and laity all over the place. Well, I've told you the story that one day in a snowstorm, they were driving by and they saw a mother holding the hand of her son walking to the grocery store. And they decided to pick him up. And they did. And the little boy was my dad. He would have my Grandpa Bob listen to Three Dog Night. My Grandpa Bob would have him listen to the Gaithers. And one night, not in a revival service, in a prayer meeting, my dad got up and said, I don't know what you all have, but whatever it is, I want it. Because he'd seen the life of Bob and Ruth lived out. They had invested time and money and effort into Dan Miller. Well, Dan Miller's ministry continues on. He's pastoring his second church now. You'd think he'd move on, but it was 20 years the first time, and it's around 20 years now. Over 20 years, actually. Out of his ministry has come missionaries, pastors' wives, salvations, sanctifications, from the oil field to the pulpit. Everybody knew who God was because Dan Miller was there to root. From him, I stand before you. I wasn't saved in a revival service. I was saved kneeling in my living room next to my parents as they prayed for me. I wanted to know for certain that God was real, and He showed Himself to me in a way that I've never doubted. I would attend Mount Carmel, where every Monday night I would go to missionary service. It was often not well attended, but there was always one other person, and that was Quincy's daughter, the person that my great uncle had prayed with to receive entire sanctification nearly 30 years beforehand. She would fall madly in love with me and beg me to marry her. I finally relented, and she regretted it to this day. She's not even in here. Oh, yeah, there she is. I expected to hear somebody complain about that.
I remember that going very differently, Dan.
That's a neat story. How God would use my great uncle when he was in high school to pray with my would-be father-in-law, so that a man from Alabama would have a call to go back to Kentucky, and that a boy from Michigan would have a call to go to Mount Carmel for high school and meet this other beautiful little girl and be married and have a wonderful pastor's wife. It's a neat story, but it's all my history. It's God's intervention on my behalf over nearly 200 years. The interventions, despite being some of them well-impactful people like D.L. Moody, were not ever done on large scale with but one person, my great-grandfather. He was the only one of those people that was saved in a revival. All of those other occasions were not great fantastic things, but one-on-one, dealing with a person right in front of them. Each generation took one person being concerned and investing in another person's life. Every single one of them dramatically changed the world around them because of personal involvement. Now, this would be a great spot for me to challenge us to do the same. But in my warped sense of creating a sermon, that's not where I'm going this morning. It would have probably been that way, and in times past I have preached those type of sermons. Except for a video that I watched on Tuesday. I was scrolling Facebook while I was supposed to be studying for Wednesday night Bible study. And I came across this little video, short video, of this little girl, probably 6, getting off her school bus. That's all it started out to be. And this little girl, as the bus pulled away, she started to walk home. And you can hear off in the distance, you hear somebody call her name. And she pauses. She turns around and says, "Daddy?" And then she gets this big smile on her face. She screams, "Daddy!" And she runs off the screen, and you never catch her again. And then the title of it at the end said, her father had been away at war for a year, and he was returning home. And then they had subsequent videos of those who had served their country and were returned and reunited with their family. Needless to say, I didn't get through it without shedding a few tears. Those families being reunited, they're very personal to me. But as I was watching them, I heard words spoken to my heart, simple words. And the word says, "I'm waiting for you." And I knew it was Jesus. And I'd never thought about it that way. That Jesus is waiting expectantly on the other side of this physical veil to greet me coming home. Amen. Just like that little girl and those little boys that we see in the videos of returning soldiers, he sees me as a soldier coming home for good. The battle's over. The battle's done. The battle's been won. But you know, it's not just Jesus. It's my granddad. For the first time in my life, I'll meet my great-granddad. For the first time in my life, I'll meet Billy Sunday and Wilbur Chapman and D.L. Moody, because they're going to be waiting for me, because they had time invested in me, whether they knew me or not. As the soldier coming home, they are excited, they are expectant, they're waiting at the finish line with open arms, cheering me on, cheering you on, saying, "I can't wait till they get home." What a party we're going to have. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 says, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because the joy that awaited him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and now he's seated in the place of honor beside God's throne." Folks, I don't preach the word because my dad was a pastor, because my granddad was a pastor, because my great-granddad was a pastor. I don't preach the word because I've got uncles and aunts that are serving in the ministry. I don't preach the word because I have missionaries for family members. I don't do any of that. I do it because I'm holding on. Philippians chapter 2 verse 16 says, "Holding on fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run the race in vain or labor in vain." Man, I'm running for all my life so that I make it to the end. We're closer now than we've ever been. And I don't want to be this close and miss it. I don't want to trip at the finish line. You remember, some of you older ones probably will, and if you younger ones don't, you need to look it up. How many of you remember Get Smart and Maxwell Smart? What was his catchphrase? Missed it by that much.
Oh, yeah.
How awful it would be to have so many people invest so much time and effort and work into lives like myself and you all, to get to heaven, have to look Jesus in the eyes and say, I missed it by that much. How tragic. James chapter 1 verse 12 said, Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him. I'm running because I want a crown. And this week, I heard the cheers of those who were waiting for me, saying, come on, keep running it, keep fighting, win this battle, don't slow down, don't give up, don't give in, don't let their sacrifice and their work be for nothing. They're cheering you on. Run for the gold. Would you stand?